I don't know how to describe it other than like a demon type of sound.
But it's silhouetted, hulking, every bit of 5.5 feet wide, 13 to 14 foot tall, pitch black.
The one thing that ran through my mind when I had this encounter was I don't have a big enough gun.
Your host, two-time witness and field researcher for more than 40 years, William Jevning. Welcome to Creek Devil.
Welcome to the Q&A, everyone. Tom, let's go ahead and jump right in today.
Absolutely. Before we do that, I just want to thank everybody for these great questions. And if you like the show, we'd like to know. So click the like button and subscribe if you haven't done so already. And if you think we've deserved it and we've earned it, you can support us. We got a link to Patreon in the description in YouTube.
I'd say, too, before you get going, Tom, if you folks out there, if you've got any or know anyone, or if you've had an encounter with the creatures, get a hold of us. We'd like to talk to you.
Questions at creekdevil.com. And yes, we'd love to hear from you. All right, so we're going to dig right in. Humans walk and run by straightening their legs and extending it fully by locking the knee. We also do this to stand for long periods with minimal muscular effort. Apparently, Bigfoot can't lock their knees and extend their leg fully. Why is this? And I'm going to throw this. I'm going to start off with Forrest. You're on the hot seat. Forrest, why is this?
I'm on the hot seat. Well, if they're like any other primate other than man, they cannot do that. It has to do with the musculature on the, and I've said this many a time, primates don't walk the same. In fact, they don't even walk the same as Bigfoot. They do we do a stagger step, but they are really stagger stepped, and they walk with their legs spread apart. And this has to do with the fact that man is the only bipedal ape, and other than Bigfoot. And we do know that sometimes Bigfoot is quadrupedal because it's reported time and time again. However, if you notice how chimps, gorillas, they will get up and walk periodically on 2 feet. They lack the butt muscles to be able to extend those legs out like we do. We do see that in Bigfoot, but they have a different, and I think I tell people, go back and watch the Patterson film, because this really is the perfect way to look at it. And you can find it out there on the internet where they slow it down, they back it up, they slow it down. Bigfoot does a very peculiar thing, in that they rotate their leg out at the knee and bring it forward. This is called a compliant gait. This is why they walk in a perfectly straight line. We can't even do that. You can't put a man in a monkey suit and expect him to actually copy, because they've tried it, copy the way a Bigfoot walks. It's actually, believe it or not, more efficient than us. I have not ever seen them run with an extension like what we do. We pick our legs up and then run. Bigfoot does not seem to do that in the few times that I've seen them run. And this is partly because they don't have, our foot is adapted for running and walking. Even Bigfoot's foot is not adapted for the strictest form for walking, because they have that metatarsal break in the foot. That is the foot that is in, I would say, in development. It would be the word that I would use, evolutionary development, which I would say at some point in time we probably were in the same, in our evolutionary period. We just haven't found that particular evolutionary ancestor that shows this, but because it just seems like we just all of a sudden had a foot that was developed for walking. But Bigfoot hasn't developed that foot for walking and running like what we do. And they also, when they're walking, pick their foot up at their leg goes to almost a 90-degree angle in the back, and then they kind of swing it out and around, and then place it down in front of them. And that mid-tarsal break means that they move from the front of their foot, and that pad, they don't walk off their heel like what we do. And we have butt, and they have butts too, which is the only other ape that does. Apes don't have butts, and the way their structure is and the musculature is on our ligaments and everything, our butts are what hold us upright. And in that sense, Bigfoot has a butt that holds him upright too. But they haven't got all the development down beneath that we have developed. And like I say, who knows what they were 1 million years ago, 2 million years ago, what they look like. You know, what we see is what we've got today. And they're just like us. They're evolving. I mean, humans are evolving all the time.
You know, it's interesting. I did some reading about how we walk, and more particularly, it talked about the body's cooling mechanism and the way we walk and run. Those things are all tied together. In fact, you know, while we're not, then the reason we have, you know, a lot of knee and back problems, things like that, is because our mode of walking isn't fully developed. But we're much more efficient than a lot of other animals in terms of being able to run, you know, continuously for long, long time periods. You know, especially, you know, early hunter-gatherers would have been able to run prey down, you know, until they were exhausted. They could continue to run, you know, and maintain a kind of a constant body temperature and things like that. So, you know, we do have some perks in the way we're designed.
Well, if you, that's another thing that, man, the reason we don't have hair, we all have hair. Don't get me wrong. We have hair on we're just as hairy as the apes are. It's just more of a down on our bodies rather than the longer hair. We are developed for long distance running, and you're exactly correct that I'm sure our ancestors literally ran our prey down in long marathon type runs. We're designed for that. If you watch the people of the Kalahari Desert, they're actually a pygmoid people in Africa, the Kalahari Desert. They are still hunter and gatherers, just like they were 1 million years ago. And that's exactly what they do. They literally run their prey down, and those people can run for miles and miles and miles. And this is why some of the greatest Ethiopian people and all those people in those areas like that, they have the bodies developed for those long distance runs. That's why you see so many of the great marathon runners come from those parts of the country, world.
It's pretty amazing, actually.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Forrest,
I mean, I'm doing good. If I could run 50 feet, much less miles.
Right. Well, you know, you're talking about how the creatures can walk in a straight line. You know, there's circumstances for humans when we're able to walk even less so in a straight line.
Oh, yes.
Are you saying Bigfoot, even drunk, they could pass a DUI?
I don't know, but it'd be interesting to give it a shot.
Give it a try.
Pun intended.
Oh boy. Okay,
right,
let's go on.
All right. It's devolving here. All right. Annie brings up a really good point. Will, Tom, and Forrest were discussing which primates have lips, and it was agreed that humans are the only lipped ones, and we do get kind of lippy sometimes. However, a lot of encounters feature whistling, and I ditto that 1,000%. That was my first encounter. It was a whistle, loud, sharp whistle. So I'm with you on that. Annie says, I also think we need to consider the Haida tribe. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Their tribal totem poles and the characters on them. and she attached a link, and I took a look at it. The tribe is known for woodworking, seafaring, and trading, and I think what she's referring to are, and Will, you've talked about this in the past a few times, the totem figures that have pursed lips as being indicative of being a Bigfoot, a night whistler. So Annie, if I didn't understand your question correctly, shoot me another one, correction, and say this is what I really meant. But I think this is the direction she was going. Why do the totem poles have lips when we feel that Bigfoot does not have lips?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say the totems, the mask carvings and totem poles necessarily give them lips. It's probably more like what you would see in a chimp or gorilla or another other ape that would would purse its mouth in a position like that. That's different than actually having lips.
And it's kind of symbolic.
Yeah, right.
That they're whistling. They need to convey that message. This is a whistler.
Right.
I've actually seen the totems. There's a town, and I was just sitting here. Oh my gosh, my daughter and I were just talking about that here just not a few days ago about the totems there. When you turn off the Yellowhead Highway and you go up the Coastal Highway, there it's called the some Canadians refer to it as the Cassiar Highway, and a lot of them just call it the Coastal Highway. And you head up to Laird's Junction, and I have seen those totems there, and yes, they have pursed mouths, but I have never ever. I mean, I've actually seen them, and I would not call them lips as portraying them as lips like ours. I mean, they were just pursed mouths, and you can again, just like Will said, with I know I've seen it so much in gorillas, but chimpanzees, macaques all the time, little babies, and I've said this over and over. They make a whistling sound and they purse their lips, and they hoot when they make this. When they purse their lips, and then they have these little whistling, almost bird-like sounds that they make when they're calling their mother. When a lot of times when they get kidnapped, you'll hear them. They'll make two whoops, and then they'll make some whistles after that. It is a very distinctive call. It is the same call that may not be in the same tonal qualities, but you'll hear the same thing out of a chimpanzee if it's wanting its mother, or they'll do the same exact call, and so will a gorilla, and it, like I say, it will not be in the same tonal qualities, but they do the same thing, the two little hoots and then the whistling sounds. But they purse their lips up just like those totems do. So I think this is a very typical primate reaction. Like I say, I think Bigfoot is an enigma. They share a whole lot of qualities with humans, but they also share a whole lot of qualities with primates. And I tell you what, but as a human, you can watch primates all day long, and you think, oh my gosh, that's so human-like. And then you see babies do things, and you think, oh, that is so monkey-like. You know what? It's all primate-like is what it is,
In my first book, Notes from the Field, there were quite a number of native artists that allowed me to use pictures of their masks for my book, and I put quite a few of them in there. And just as kind of I was trying to, help promote their works, but so I got a little carried away and put a bunch of them in there, but they're great works. And I noticed looking through those just a moment ago that there were some who appeared to have lips, others who had just pursed mouths. But I think a lot of that is more, a rendering from the artist rather than an actual depiction.
Kind of like literary license with a movie.
Exactly. And maybe they're putting lips on them to convey that, hey, this is a whistling. It's something that humans would understand, and maybe not, an exact replication of what the creatures would look like doing it.
Well, we're continually anthropomorphizing animals all the time.
Exactly.
I even do it with cats. Tom and I both do it with our cats. So.
And especially with artwork, it's to convey from, the artist, which is a human, to other humans, what is coming from that piece of art. It's not necessarily, nuts and bolts rendering.
Exactly.
Well, and if we're talking about the totems, I would say pretty much everything in the totem is some kind of symbolic representation. It's not a exact, and it's not. I don't think it's intended to be.
Right.
No. Even the eagles. I mean,
beautiful artwork.
let's face it. You can only do so much with with a pole. So you're kind of limited on what you're doing with those things anyway. So I think that what ends up happening is there becomes with each tribe there's a standard form of artwork, and this will be passed along through the eons of time. You see it in Egyptian artwork, you see it in Roman artwork. It's just it's a natural thing that humans do.
It'd be great to have some native artisans on the show to talk about, what they put into their work and what they're trying to convey, etc.
Yeah, it would.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, kudos to some of that artwork. I mean,
it's beautiful.
Look at the Seattle
Seahawks.
It's
all beautiful.
It's a great.
Yes.
I love their logo. Okay. Okay. So when your group goes out looking for Bigfoot, how long does it usually take to determine if there are Bigfoot in the area present? And I would say, what was it, 2 hours?
It was pretty quick. Usually it's pretty quick because they'll mark their areas and when they're present. So if you see the marking, you've got a pretty good assurance that they're in the area if they're relatively fresh.
Well, that dovetails into this next question. And what are the signs that you look for? I would say I would expand that a little bit by looking and listening. Actually, Will, you're familiar with SILS, stop, look, listen, smell. And that's kind of what it is. You stop, look, listen, smell. I don't think we smelled anything this last time, but we certainly heard plenty, and we saw plenty.
Yeah, typically the marking you're going to look for is the 90-degree tree breaks or twists. That's typically what they do. Now, they'll do other things, but that's the common one.
Well, and the interesting thing that you pointed out on that is you only find that in areas where there's creatures.
Well, look how much country. Look how much country we covered in July. I mean, in a single day, I don't know how many miles we went from one area to the next. We're probably we should go about 20 miles from one place to another.
It was 35, I think.
So over a 35. Now we'll just use that one particular jaunt as an example. For a 35-mile jaunt up through the forest from point A to point B, I told you guys, I said, now watch for the markings. And we didn't see any, did we?
Only when we got to the areas
where we suspected they were, yes.
Yeah.
And if it were something natural, you'd see it frequently. But when you only see it in places where the creatures are, and it's just as telling not to see it as when you do see it.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, very much so. So that was a biggie. The other one is, of course, footprints. We found some of those.
We did, yes, 18 inches.
Yeah, which was the minute you find that footprint, then if your head was on a swivel before, it's on a triple swivel now.
That's for sure. Well, they weren't fresh tracks, but when you find an 18-inch print, that's a pretty sizable track. So, because typically they're, anywhere between 14 and 16 inches. That's a typical adult. You find something at 17, 18 inches, that's a big one.
Just going to do the math. 18 times
That's about a 10-footer.
Yeah, that's exactly. Yeah, 9.9, so right up there. Big.
That's big.
Very big. Okay.
And the tire tracks that were near it, and the tracks were made when it was raining, probably 2 months earlier. So it was about a 2-month-old print, that one in particular on the road.
Yeah, it was. And I remember the time because it was probably actually back in, even into June.
Yeah.
So it may have been less than 2 months. It was monsoon season. everybody was talking about, man, here it is, summertime, and it's just.
So there was a
pouring
truck
down.
or some kind of a vehicle that had driven that road, and what were those tire tracks? Maybe 2 inches deep.
Right.
That were made in the mud, and the Sasquatch track was the same depth as the vehicle.
What does that tell you? Heavy.
Heavy.
And this was where y'all were at?
Yes.
One of the areas. The area that we were at was, it was just like one ridge line after another. Just it's a huge area.
Yeah, we had a search pattern we were doing in that region, so we were kind of systematically working those ridges.
Well, now, was that anywhere near where, oh gosh, now I just had a brain fart. Oh, God. Your friend that was, when you and her husband went off in the woods and left her in the car, is that anywhere near where you hit the ground?
No, that was 25, 30 miles from there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's a long ways from there, but this is an area where Kurt and I and another friend of mine, actually 3 other buddies of mine, have been up there various times over the years. And I got to tell you, it's a productive area. We never return empty-handed, never. But we do return, and I consider that a success.
Well, that's a success, yes. Success for you, failure for the Sasquatch.
And we're going to keep it that way. Well, we've heard screams, and remember that one night, I think the third night we were there, we were still configuring and fine-tuning some of the equipment, some of the audio equipment. At the very last second, we pulled into an area that was a clearing, and I knew it's 2 a.m, they're gone, they're not around.
The logs that were being thrown around.
Yeah, within 5 minutes, they were just pummeling these trees. Yeah, that was an interesting, again, case in point. We went to where they weren't. They were. Okay, and then kind of a follow-up to that question was, are you usually successful in finding evidence or getting close to the actual Bigfoot? I'll rephrase that. Yes, we are always successful in getting evidence. It's not our fault that they're just there. Are we able to get close to the Bigfoot? I think it's they're getting close to us.
Yeah, there were numerous times they were in the same location we were at.
Yeah. And it was I got to tell you, when they pick up something the size of a telephone pole and smash a tree, and that's like 50 yards away.
It was quite a distance, and it was loud.
Loud, and it caught her undivided attention for the whole group immediately.
Okay, so what do we get next?
All right. Okay, so this person says, I've heard about wildlife biologists doing their doctoral research on wolverines, one of the most wild and elusive creatures of the boreal forest. And incidentally, the area where we were, I have seen a wolverine there one time. Very, very husky thing. He said it took years of outdoor work to finally get direct observation. When visiting the Great Lakes in Ontario, I was told a similar story about cougars. They had found tracks, and they're in the park. It would be interesting to hear from biologists, wildlife biologists, researchers who do this type of work on animals. How long does it take to get an actual sighting? And actually, I think that's a very perceptive question. I like that. That's a very good question. Good kind of an analogy there. He wants to know particularly what techniques are used to locate their animals. I know what we use, but we're not looking for wolverines or cougars.
No.
Other than out of the corner of our eye, just make sure, okay, we're good, Anyway, I think that was more of a comment, and I thought it was really good.
Yeah, I guess we'd have to get one of those biologists who do that to talk to us and tell us how they do it.
Yeah, I think that would be an interesting.
I don't think it would work with these creatures, but just as a point of interest.
Yeah, no, it obviously would not. Um, and anyway, that's so. One of the questions that somebody asked recently was, and we it's been asked many times, but how and why and when do the creatures exude a smell? How often do you smell it? Why do they do it? And where does that smell come from? How do the creatures produce it?
Well, it used to be something years ago that newspaper people, when they'd write articles, they would pick up a few points, the red eyes, the smell, the footprints. That was always the kind of the main features of a Bigfoot article. Whether those things actually happened or not, that was the things that the writer would pick up on, and this happened frequently. But in reality, smell is very seldom noticed. I think they only do it when they're excited, and it probably comes from scent glands.
But you have experienced that on at least one occasion.
I did one time, yes.
And it was potent. It was
It was disgusting. You couldn't stand in it. We had to leave very quickly that location. We were about ready to throw up, both of us, and immediately, and it was raining, and I said I got to go back there and see if that was something that was there or not. And as soon as I went back to the spot, and we didn't go very far, we only went maybe 30, 40 feet out of it. And when I got back to the spot where we had smelled this, the smell was gone. And then I found the spot where it was, flattened down in the moss. So whatever was there, and I believe it was one of the creatures, because we were there on a recent sighting. It happened that day in that area. There was moss that was smashed down next to the tree line. So I think one of the creatures was actually right there watching us.
Looking back, what are your thoughts that you had to have been, number one, that close, number two, your presence must have been a provocation.
Some kind, yeah. It wasn't happy that we were there, I think.
Yeah.
But it wasn't the kind. It was strong. You could not stand in that spot and keep breathing it.
Wow. Were you guys a little bit on edge, or?
Yeah, well, we were kind of used to being out looking for these things, on a pretty regular basis in Skamania County. So, I wouldn't say fearful at that time. Of course, I didn't know as much then as I know today, but today I would have been a lot more head on a swivel than I was back then. But that would have been in the mid-'90s, I think that occurred. But right. We were watching.
Yeah. Was it just two of you?
Just two of us, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I got a call. I got a call and a report, and we zipped out there as quick as we could.
Oh, that's cool. All right. When you go out researching Bigfoot, do you think of your research trips as tracking and following them, or waiting and try to lure them to come to where you are, or is it more about collecting the artifacts or evidence?
Well, you're not going to lure them. Behind. What I do now is different than I've done in the past because I know so much more about them. I go to where there's a pretty high chance I believe they're going to be, and that panned out when we were there in July. Some of the methodology that we placed in effect, and I don't want to go too much into that because it gets you pretty close what I know now. And that comes from other sources I have too, and I don't think I should talk too much about that yet. The interviews we were finally able to do after many years, but I guess I could say it. For those who have known that I've talked about Mr. Black for many years, I've known him for 10 years. We finally recorded the first 2-hour session with him a couple days ago. But we're not going to put that on the show right away. We're still working with that material. We're going to record him more. So lots of information through him and other sources, not just him. And that's all I'm going to say about that. That's all I'm going to say about that.
It was eye-opening.
Yeah, it was eye-opening for sure.
These two highly placed sources, unconnected to each other, had repeating information, repeating details on incidents.
They matched very closely.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were both government people, both completely unrelated to one another.
And the details were disturbing.
Extremely so. Yeah, I would, like I said in the past, if people out there who think they want to go looking for Bigfoot knew what we know, they would never go out in the woods.
Yeah, just watch it on YouTube.
So at some point, the information we will put it out, but and we're discussing how to do that. So it won't be something right away, folks. But the information is coming.
Yeah, you guys will be privy to it. Okay, so here's a question, and this person wants to know. Just had a few questions and observations. A, you've mentioned Neanderthals in relation to humans. Is it possible to suggest Sasquatch could be a Neanderthal or related to him? Have Neanderthals been found in North America or just Eurasia?
Well, we'll pass this off to Forrest, but I want to mention one thing in a minute. We did ask Mr. Black that specific question, and he said they're not human, they're not ape, they're their own thing.
Yeah.
And apparently that's what they were told.
Now, are you referring to Neanderthals, or are you referring to Bigfoot?
Well, the Sasquatch, yeah,
okay.
yeah, the Sasquatch, he said, were their own thing, their own species.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I agree totally there. I think they're a species that's developed through the eons of time, and they developed a form of bipedalism, and it's now. I mean, paleoanthropologists are finding out now that and of course they're going to keep continually finding more information as finds become evident, that you've got bipedal apes out there, and that bipedalism was not exclusive to our human ancestors. It's just that the period of 6 to 8 million years ago, there was a break in the genes, and apes went one way, and monkeys and apes went one way, and then humans progressed on another route.
Fossil-wise, I think bipedalism has been shown numerous times in the past.
Yes, and there are apes out there that actually exhibited, fossil apes that exhibited bipedalism, but they didn't become humans. So that's why I say what Bigfoot is today may not have been what Bigfoot was 6 million years ago. And we could be actually, in some of these finds, actually be looking at what may have actually been an ancestor to what became Bigfoot. Nobody knows.
And you remember, Forrest, the other guy we had on, John, my other anthropologist friend, he said that too. He felt that was a strong possibility.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, they had a find in Borneo here just recently. And I say just recently, it could have been 10 years ago, and they're just now announcing it. You know how that goes. So, I mean, I get really, I don't know why these paleoanthropologists, anthropologists, archaeologists, any of them can't just throw this stuff out there and let the whole of academia and even non-academics look at this stuff and analyze it and have put in opinions, but they don't want to do that. That's not the way they handle it. So they hold it back, and then you may not hear about it until 10 years later, and you go, oh, and they make it all sound like, well, it just happened yesterday. So I'm not really for sure when they actually excavated this body, but they just found basically what represents Homo sapiens sapien in Borneo, with a dating of like 1.9 million years.
That's pretty early.
Mm-hmm. So, they find this stuff all the time, and like I say, they hold back on it, and then I've been following this development. I thought was fairly recent too, of a discovery, a bipedal ape in Chad, and I mean, they're saying that this ape was bipedal, and they did have some quadrupedalism. It's a Sahelanthropus. I'm assuming that's how they're pronouncing it, but it started with an S, a Helanthropus, and this thing was bipedal. It was a bipedal ape, but it developed its bipedalism very similar to what the orangutan does. You know, when the orangutans, they walk on trees, holding the trees with their upright hands, and then walking along the trees. And they think that in some of these apes, that's how they develop their bipedalism, which might even stand to reason why you see this mid-dorsal break still in Bigfoot, because I think Bigfoot spends a lot more time in those trees than what we think they do.
Well, it just goes to show that something like a Sasquatch is not unique.
No, but I think it is an enigma. It's got a lot of things that we would call almost human-like traits. The intelligence level is so advanced as far as other apes are concerned, but it also exhibits a lot of just plain apish type qualities too.
And we won't even talk about all the variants.
Oh, this is true.
Because that opens up a whole new can of worms.
Exactly.
Okay, Tom, let's move on.
All right. And so now this person also wants to know, when we go looking for Sasquatch, do we ever use calls or scent markers?
No. Number one, if you're looking for a wild creature, you don't want to announce your presence at all possible, because they're going to run for the hills.
You know, here's the thing. If Bigfoot, we think it's 99.99% certain that they do have infrasound capabilities, that, you know, when they make calls, whatever that call may be, not only do you have no clue what they're saying, but you also, they may be speaking in a vocal range above and beyond. We can hear.
Well, not only that, they're going to listen to something like that and say, well, that's not one of us.
Well, that's a good point. And think about this. How many times have people mentioned they've been in the woods and they heard, like Gerald, for example, he said his boss and son were out, I think they were out elk hunting, and they heard Gerald calling them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you know, they know darn good and well it's not Gerald. And, you know, other people talked about, you know, they heard, you know, kids laughing in the wood. So we know when these things are mimicking us, almost.
Well, they're very attuned to different sounds in their environment and things that we do also. And they're going to recognize right away if it's not one of them. I mean, they're going to be extremely familiar with each other and their own noises and what they're going to do. So people go out there and do this call blasting stuff, you know, save your breath. It's not effective.
Right.
Not effective.
Well, I want to throw something else in here. Goodall did not go out and study chimpanzees by doing chimpanzee calls. Neither did she go out and put out scent markers. Diane Posse did not go out and put scent markers out, nor make gorilla calls to watch the gorillas. She went out there, and both of these women went out there and quietly sat and waited and waited and waited, oftentimes just till the gorillas or the chimpanzees showed up. And sometimes disastrous results happen. Jane Goodall was nearly killed twice by a male that did not like her. And so, I mean, first off, you got people these idiots going out in the woods and making these whoops and this and that and the other, all these weird calls, and they have no idea what those mean to a Bigfoot. Irregardless of the fact that the Bigfoot probably knows that that's not a Bigfoot making that noise.
Exactly.
I mean, I've heard someone get pretty close to some of the recordings and stuff, but, the Bigfoot's probably going to realize, that's not another Bigfoot, but you just announced to them your location.
Right.
And they may or may not show up just to see what the heck you're doing.
Right.
But, you have no idea what you've just announced. You might have just announced, hey, supper's here,
And they may think that anyway by just announcing your presence.
It's supper for there.
That's something, Mr. Black, it's something related to that he said very specifically. And I've said this before, it's something I suspected, but he confirmed it. When people go out and bang on trees with sticks and stuff, he said that's not what they're doing. It is tongue pops. And he said they had recordings of them that sounded very much like, that they were loud, they were strong, and they would sound at times like anything from, something, wood being smacked on a tree to almost like a gunshot. And we actually have a recording of one of those too.
And he said that, he goes, you don't understand the power behind these things.
Extremely powerful
these are
creatures.
Massive creatures. Yes. Their tongue pops are not our tongue pop.
No, nothing like it. So I wanted to throw that in there too, because that's another thing that people do that save your time doing it, because it's not what they're doing.
And the results are, well, I can tell, 100% zero. There was, where we stayed at, remember that little story we heard about there was another group that shall remain nameless?
Right.
And they went out and they worked on, I don't know what it was, whiskey or something, and then they got to do these Bigfoot howls on the highway.
Yeah, right. They didn't even go out in the woods. They were right there next to the hotel.
Yeah.
And the locals, especially people who ran the place, weren't particularly pleased with that behavior.
So Bigfoot didn't frequent that motel, huh?
No.
Okay.
I wonder what they'd order, king size or queen size. Well, I haven't.
Okay, so this person also wants to know, do you agree there are credible sightings of the creatures in all the states except Hawaii?
Yes.
That's true. Now, more so in some than others. I mean, there's some of the Midwest states that
right.
They do get them, but I don't think they get quite the intensity that you get on the East and the West Coast.
Well, and again, you got to remember there's 22 different variants of these things, so with different personalities and temperaments and all these factors. So, you might have one variation that's not quite as aggressive as another one, let's say. So maybe, the more aggressive ones are being seen more often in a location, but there might be just as many of the other kind, in an adjacent area that you would think there wouldn't be anything in.
But yeah, Mr. Black talked about some of the ones that are just downright creepy.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're all creepy, but some of them were exceptionally creepy.
Exactly, yeah.
How do they remain undetected the way they do?
Well, there's a lot of animals that remain undetected. I mean, you go out driving around through the forest, how often do you see wildlife? I mean, typically it's not very much, right?
Right, exactly. Especially in the Northwest, in the Cascades, they're there, but it's a very heavily vegetated.
Humans are noisy and obnoxious creatures, and most wildlife keep their distance from us.
Yeah.
They know we're dangerous.
They do, exactly.
Some are dangerous and idiots. Okay, this person wants to know, are there any credible reports of Sasquatch in Mexico, and if so, what regions?
I remember years ago interviewing a lady who was actually, she was a child growing up in Mexico, and I think it was northern Mexico where they were. And the gist of the story was her and her brother were riding in the back of this pickup. Her parents were in the front, and one of the creatures was actually running after the truck trying to get the kids out of the back of it. But I don't remember exactly where she said the area was, but I believe it was northern Mexico.
I remember that story, and I can't remember where it was located either.
It was too many years ago. I just don't recall.
Yeah, and Brenda, she had a similar story to that. There was one where, unfortunately, the creature was successful getting one of the kids. So, okay.
Well, don't they have something in the jungles down there called a marangari?
Yeah.
Or is that the sloth type creature? I can't remember.
I don't recall either, but in a lot of places they have a smaller creature and a larger one. You see it from Australia, South America, Africa, all these different regions, even in Asia with the Yeti.
Yeah, they call them brownies or something in Australia, the little ones.
Yeah, something like that.
Okay, and this person wants to know, has Sasquatch ever been seen hunting ocean prey, like maybe wading into estuaries or hunting at low tide? Look for crabs, clams, mollusks, that sort of thing.
I remember, the author of Raincoast Sasquatch, Rob Alley. I was talking to him one time, and he says, I was telling me about a story where there were some people driving on a highway next to a bay, and they thought there was a guy out in the water up to his waist. And as they got closer, realized it was one of these creatures out there and had a salmon holding it up above its head, almost like it was a prize or something. I think that's how the story went, but it was out waist deep in the water.
Well, now there is a story on, and I've seen it and it's on the Monster Quest on the History Channel, and this took place in a bay in Alaska, and they had it was some fishermen and two men and a woman, as I recall, and they had anchored in this bay, and they were close enough to the shore that they could hear, they'd already seen before the sun had gone down a couple of grizzlies wandering up and down the shoreline. And a little later in the evening, they actually heard some noise coming from the shoreline. And and because most of those boats up there have these big, powerful floodlights on them that they can move around and such. They have to have them for being able to put on the decks for the pods and stuff that they throw over, and they turned this floodlight out towards the shore, and there was one of these Bigfoot sitting on the shore opening up clams. So, and that was the noise that they heard. It was breaking open these clams.
Yeah, I'm sure they eat whatever.
Just eating them.
Yeah, whatever's available, sure.
Yeah, and then the next morning when they went in, to see, they took one of their boats, smaller boats, in to the shore to see what was going on, and there was this huge pile of clamshells there. So this thing had been out there feeding all night on these clams.
I'm sure they watch native peoples, eat shellfish, because I remember when I was taking my archaeology training, that was one of the first couple of sites I got to work on digs. We were digging up tons and tons of shellfish, because that was their garbage dumps. That's what we were digging up, all their garbage.
Kitchen, what they call kitchen middens, and those are the best place in the world to dig. It's amazing what you find in those things.
Oh, yeah, but it just goes to show that, humans were eating a lot of that kind of stuff. So, the creatures obviously saw them, and if they weren't already eating it, then they were after they saw the humans doing it.
Well, we had that guy. We had a guy he was originally from Boston, but he was, I believe, ex-Marine. He'd been a Gulf War vet who moved to Maine. He bought that house in Maine, and One of the things he found odd was the huge piles of, because he's right there in the estuary, piles of clamshells. And turns out he's got these things on his property.
Yeah, it was something. I mean, you know, they're going to eat what's available, so.
Raw clams, absolutely.
Clams are good.
Sure.
And then finally, kind of a follow-up to this question. This person wants to know if there's a predictable time and means to find them. And I think we know the answer to that, but Will, I'll pass that off to you.
What do you mean, a particular time to go looking for these things?
Well, I'm going to say a particular time of day.
Well, I would tell people don't go looking for them in a particular time of day, but they start getting active right around dusk, and then they're heading back to their bedding areas at dawn in the mornings. But they're also feeding during those time periods too.
Yeah. So being in the lower elevations during their feeding periods
is not a good thing.
Not good. You might be on the menu.
Exactly.
Well, okay, if Sasquatch seems closely associated with water or swamps, is there any evidence that they're persistent living in dry areas and they're not moving through them? Where do you think they would be getting their water?
Well, there's tons of water sources everywhere. I mean, even the site we have in Arizona, where our guy there's finding hundreds of tracks all the time. It's actually on a river. So.
Oh. And Forrest, you have them on your property from time to time?
Well, yeah, and you know, going back to the Arizona thing, you know, they avail themselves of water sources there around windmills and water tanks for livestock and such. They've got to do that too. I mean, they're going to smell water just like any other animal. They're going to come and drink it, and just like deer and raccoons and possums and all the little mammals out there, they're going to go and avail themselves of any source of water that they've got. And I'm sure that, and I've yet to do it, and I need to do it, is set up a game camera. Of course, if I set up a game camera, they'll probably never show back up again. You know how that works. So,
well, you know, and we do have a picture of a juvenile where a rancher set up a game cam. He was having the creatures hanging around his corral, and again in Arizona. And on the picture it says it's 115 degrees. So if I was that little guy, I'd be sitting there with my feet in the tub too.
yeah, and I was going to mention that, but I didn't know if I should or not. But you know, that was obviously a juvenile just sitting there enjoying, you know, soaking his feet.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Well, Forrest,
absolutely, no doubt.
Your property, you have what are called water tanks, and I think of a metal thing when you talk about tanks, but you have a different definition of tanks. And do you have those on your property? Would they be able to get water from them?
Yeah, and I have, you know, I think you and I discussed this. I have a tank exactly like that juvenile was sitting on, but it's sitting inside of a loafing shed with 3 fillies. So I've never had any. I've never found any Bigfoot sitting in there soaking their feet. But and you know what? I do walk around these water tanks that, like I told you, I had some that they're actually in the pasture with my horses, but I positioned them so that I could I water them off the water hoses from the house. So they've actually got a float in them, and I just hook the water hose up to the switch it from tank to tank and fill the tanks up. And I have looked around there, and I have never seen any footprints. Now I'm gonna bring up something here right now that I didn't have a chance to tell you guys, but because this just happened day before yesterday. Anita was over here, and she was looking at some of my weanlings I've got out here, and we were walking to the back, and we came back, and we were actually looking at a man's footprint. Somebody had walked through my property with about a size 12 boot on. And while we're looking at that, all of a sudden she goes, "Oh my God, what's that?" And there was a line of footprints in the dirt there, along with the footprints from this size 12 boot that had walked between the barn and the old house and looked like walked up towards my mobile home up here. And but they were like the smaller footprints, that they were only about 13, 14 inches long. They weren't that great big one that I saw. So she was the one that first noticed them. And so we were just like, oh my gosh, because I was more concerned about the fact that there was a human had walked through there. And there hadn't been any men out there on the property with a foot that big. So that was kind of concerning me. And then while we were walking and we started laughing, I said, well, I wonder who was tracking who. Because this person had to have come through here at night. And of course, I'm sure Bigfoot did too. So who was tracking who is what I'd like to know.
Yeah, good question.
So, and they could have come through at different times. I don't know, but I just thought it was kind of peculiar.
Be interesting to see if those boot prints suddenly the stride increased dramatically,
or they just vanished.
Right.
Oh heavens!
All right, Tom, we got time for
where they headed to was the gravel driveway. So once they got on that Caliche driveway, there was no way of tracking either one of them.
Right. We got time for one more question, Tom.
All right, let's find a real good one here. And how many Sasquatch? I like this one. How many Sasquatch do you think are in Washington, Oregon regions where you do your research?
Oh boy.
And
it's impossible to tell, really. There are a lot of them. The population's a decent size, but it's impossible to know numbers because there's no way to get a head count.
No, they're really funny about that. They don't help us with that.
The area we're working there is probably, a dozen or 15, maybe 20. We don't know.
But when they're 10 or 15 feet away, that's one too many.
I mean,
particular moment.
The track size range we know is, the one that we saw in September, that you found that line of prints, and we saw there was still one left there when we went there in September. What was that, 5 or 6 inches long?
Yeah.
And then there's the 18-inch one, so you got a pretty good range there.
Well, Kurt and I and Joe have been up there many times, and we've found so many tracks. We found 14 inches, real common, 14, 15, 16.
Which is typical,
Yeah, typical, and then the 17 and 18-inch ones.
Yeah, so
it's really weird to see.
So there's at least a half a dozen right there just by the prints.
Yeah.
And like I say, the group size I think is much larger than that in that area. So.
Well,
you mean to tell me the feds haven't decided to do a census on Bigfoot?
Not that we're privy to.
But it's interesting that meadow that we were in. I'd been there with a couple of other guys 2 years earlier. We were there till 12:30 at night. And the opposite ravine, you heard these screams and barks and roars coming across. And I think they were trying to communicate with that one that we saw, and it wasn't responding back. There was a whole group of them making a ruckus about a mile away.
Yeah.
And one of the guys goes, "Those aren't effing coyotes."
No, not those kind of noises.
No. That's it. That's all the questions we have for now.
Yeah, that was perfect.
Listen, I want to thank everybody.
That was good timing. We just ran out of time.
Okay.
Go ahead, Tom. I'm sorry.
So good questions. Keep them coming. Questions@creekdevil.com.
Forrest, any final thoughts?
No, I don't think so. Good as usual.
All right. Well, great discussion, great questions. Everyone, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Creek Devil. If you or anyone you know has had an encounter with these creatures, please contact us at williamjevning@yahoo.com. That's William, Jevning, @yahoo.com. All communication is confidential. Join us for another program next week. And until then, keep your eyes open out there.